Kshama Sawant is an Indian-American economist and a socialist politician. Sawant is a member of the Seattle City Council from 2014. She has been in news recently for piloting the law by the City Council banning caste discrimination. Rohit Sharma from Washington DC spoke to her on the various aspects of the first of its kind statute passed in the US. This is an India Abroad video.
All right, Kshama, thank you so much for doing this, and making time for us to be able to do this. First things first, this has been a little controversial, but I wanted to understand from you as to why this was important, especially when it comes to the city of Seattle.
We actually have a statistical analysis to show that caste discrimination is starting to be a serious and pervasive issue throughout the United States. But not surprisingly, most immediately available data is from the tech sector, because that's where most of the workers feel more emboldened to speak up, because they're also afraid of retaliation. And so we first of all, we have the testimony of hundreds of workers, especially, as I said, in the tech sector, and basically every top corporation that you might think of is implicated, like Facebook, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Cisco, IBM, and so on. And then in terms of statistical studies that I was mentioning, one of them is a study by the Carnegie Endowment of International Peace, which reveals the same aspect that you get from anecdotal data, that it is starting to be a pervasive issue. And why Seattle? I mean, Seattle obviously is one of the tech hubs, so we have heard from hundreds of Dalit and oppressed caste workers. In fact, many of them also courageously spoke up during the public testimonials during the City Council discussion on this ordinance. But I would say that this kind of ordinance to ban caste discrimination is needed in multiple cities, especially where there is a certain concentration of South Asian workers. But the reason Seattle got there first and became the first ever city, actually the first jurisdiction of any level outside South Asia to do this, is because we have a social city council office through my office, which has a long track record. I mean, I've been on the council for almost a decade, and we have a long track record of winning victories that are thought of as impossible by using our office to build wider movements. And that's exactly how we won this as well, by building a wider movement.
Okay, so some of the people who've opposed the passing of this ordinance, which is a law by now, say they oppose caste discrimination, right? But some of them have come out and said, it could be a violation of the 1965 civil rights law. Have you had any of those people tell you that in person, or how have you responded to that?
Yeah, we've heard practically every argument under the sun, but honestly, these are right-wing talking points. And if you look at the organizations that have opposed this ordinance, it's the Hindu American Foundation, the Coalition of Hindus of North America. These are organizations with a far-right agenda, and they oppose this ordinance, but that's far from the only right-wing position that they have taken. If you go on their websites, you'll see that their overall agenda is on the far right and is very aligned with the agenda of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Bharatiya Janata Party, and in fact, very ideologically aligned with the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which, as you know, is driven by Hindu fundamentalist ideas. And the other organization, and I would say the most prominent organization that came out in opposition of our ordinance, is none other than the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, which, as many of your viewers and readers would know, who know about India, that this is one of the most prominent and dangerous far-right organizations, which has been implicated in incidents like the 2002 massacre of Muslims in the western Indian state of Gujarat. And so when the right wing says that, or when somebody says that I oppose caste discrimination, but then they oppose a law that bans caste discrimination, that itself shows the contradiction between what they say and what they actually stand for. Because my simple question to them is, if you oppose caste discrimination, then why do you oppose a law that bans caste discrimination? It's as simple as that. And as far as these ideas are concerned, that it will somehow passing a law that bans discrimination of one kind, that is going to affect some sort of dominant group. There is no truth to this. In fact, the Seattle anti-discrimination law as a whole, before we passed this ordinance, already prohibits discrimination on the basis of religion or nationality. So there is no reality attached to these talking points.
Okay, so you mentioned two organizations there. You mentioned the Hindu American Foundation, and you mentioned the Coalition of Hindus of North America, and I happened to speak to both of them and in detail. And there are some things that they've mentioned, and I wanted to get some clarification on that from you. So, well, let's go back. Let's first go to Kohuna, and their response again is that they oppose caste discrimination, but they're not happy with the fact that the law essentially assumes that all the higher castes, are going to absolutely discriminate against lower caste, and then that this law actually makes that assumption. Also, one of the things that they talk about is how different castes are considered or have been classified differently in different states. So to them, I think their talking point was, how would the city of Seattle classify these castes? Would that mean that they're going to go back and basically start classifying them? Would every person of Indian origin have to not check a box on all the forms to sort of indicate what their caste is when they're hired? Because one of the things that also mentioned was that it could also drive people to not hire people of South Asian origin, because now anything because this appears to be an open-ended law as far as Kona is concerned, that people would be scared that they could be sued, like we've seen in Cisco.
It's just astounding how filled with fantasy these points are, because there is no connection to planet Earth. Firstly, as far as their fear-mongering that the law targets everybody of dominant caste, there is no such thing. Anybody is free to go and look at what the ordinance says, and not only the ordinance, but what the underlying anti-discrimination law of Seattle says. Because the city of Seattle already had a very comprehensive anti-discrimination law. We've not rewritten that law. We've simply added caste as a characteristic that is recognized by law, and that's tremendously historic because caste is it's for the first time outside South Asia. Caste is now being acknowledged as a form of discrimination by law.
Kshama, two more questions. I've obviously done some research and talked to some of the peoples, and one question that obviously came through was, how would this impact the second, third generation Indian American kids, who obviously are not from India, born, raised here, and if they were to get into mixed marriages, obviously have no idea about what their caste is, probably, and we're talking like 40, 50, 60 years down the lane, and you've said this, that they don't have to worry about it, but in some case, unknowingly, if they were to get into trouble, don't you think that something of this sort would somebody could actually misuse this law to say, hey, this guy is from XYZ caste and he's discriminating me, although the person may not have even no idea about their caste? Because we live in America where people predominantly, I think, second, third generation, they start, we see a lot of interracial marriages and all that. So this is a very organic question coming from one of the people I spoke to. And the other question that I have for you is, what's next, right? So if you could answer the first question and then the next one after that.
Sure. I mean, obviously you can never predict exactly what is going to happen in the future and side it with the right wing. So the best thing that we can do from Seattle for workers who are watching this, and if you want to win this in your cities, well, the best thing for you would be to learn the lessons from Seattle, how we won this. We had to build a united movement, a movement that united Dalit-led organizations alongside dominant caste Hindus, organizations like, we're talking about the Hindu American Foundation opposing it. Well, let's talk about the fact that the Hindus for Human Rights organization supported this, where we had letters from people saying, I'm a proud Hindu and I am proudly supporting this ordinance. We had support from Muslim organizations, Sikh organizations. We had Sikh working people travel all the way from Vancouver, BC to be with us and speak up in favor of the ordinance. We had Black community leaders like Reverend Robert Jeffrey, who's a local Black pastor, who supported us and also wrote an op-ed in favor of this alongside a Dalit leader. Actually, he wrote an op-ed alongside Ram Kumar, who's a leader in the Ambedkar International Center. And that op-ed was very important because it drew the links between the history of racism and the history of the caste system, and how the fight for the civil rights and the ongoing fight against racial discrimination is so linked with the fight against caste discrimination and oppression. We had the support of Amnesty International, Arundhati Roy, Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Racism. We had tremendous support on our side. So that's the kind of movement we will need to build in order to win this. And the other important component of our movement, and why we won, without which we would not have won, is for our movement to be very clear who's on our side and who's not. So always have a clear idea of who's on your side and who's not. Don't look at this with rose-tinted glasses, and always remember the Democratic Party is not on your side if you're fighting against oppression. And for working people, we have to build independent movements.